Meet a man who paints not only with brushes, but with memory, with spirit, and with emotion. Kent Estey brings his story to the canvas through vibrant oils, acrylics, and inks. His work is not about replicating the world, it is about translating the feeling of it, of movement, of light, of ancestral connection. Kent's artistic practice is a continuation of an indigenous creative lineage, one shaped by beading, basketry, birch bark, and the subtle conversations between land and sky. This is Beyond the Art. We're honored to welcome an artist who helps us feel our way back to ourselves.
Kent, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today. Your work has been making waves not just for its beauty, but its emotional depth. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey as an artist and how you came to find your voice through painting?
Welcome, Anin Boujou, to my Ojibwe friends and family. It's wonderful to be with you today. And what an introduction. Wow, those words. I can I borrow that, Joe? I'm always rewriting my artist statement, and that was great. Thank you for doing that. So I guess I'm 64 years old, and I still consider myself an emerging artist. I've only been showing my work in public since 2016, and the reluctancy, I guess, was fear, basically. Making that step. And showing your work. I understand it better today, but it's not coming from an art background, coming from an educational background. I didn't go to school to be a painter, and so I just had to challenge myself to put my work out there, and I'm glad I did, because a lot of amazing things have happened over the last 7-8 years, and I've been able to meet so many wonderful people along the way, so many wonderful artists that I didn't know were out there, and it's been really, really exciting. I know now that you can't do this alone. You need a network of friends and connections to get where you want to go. And so I'm not saying this journey involves a lot of people. It involves people who believe in you, people who trust you. Galleries, nonprofit organizations, arts councils, arts boards, individuals, galleries. It takes a lot of people talking about Kent Estey's paintings to bring it to where I am today. And I'm just beginning. 7 years ago, I didn't have a studio. Have a studio today where people can come and I can practice my art and have a showroom. When you live out in the woods, we're smack dab in the middle of the White Earth Reservation. I live in the big metropolis of Natawash, which is 500 people and about 300 Labradors. There's not a lot of opportunity, I got a call just recently, and this woman called, and she said the conversation started with, "Are you for real?" And I said, first of all, who is this? Why are you calling? But she said, I know Netawash, and there's nothing in Netawash. There's no art studio in Netawash. She said there's the village store and the Catholic church and the school. There's no art studio in Netawash. And I said, well, there is now. Come on over. And she did. And she came, and she drove 40 miles and came to my studio. And she said, I can't find the art that I want to find for my new home, and your work speaks to me. So that's why I came, and she purchased, 3 pieces for her new home. And she said, now I know that there really is an art studio in Netawash. And I said, yeah, and please come back. Please come back. Tell your friends that there's something more and beyond just the local village store. So, it's been a good, it's been a kind of a quick journey, Joe. I tell my wife, I said, how long are we going to wait to make things happen? I'm 64. Am I going to wait till I'm 74 to do this or try this or apply for this show? I said, no, we need to do it now. We need to do it now because I started late. When I went to Bemidji State University, I expected to go to teach art and become an educator and teach art because my art teacher in high school saved me, I think, because I didn't have anywhere else to go and no one really believed me or believed in me. I wasn't into sports. I wasn't into music. I knew I wanted to paint. And he believed in me and encouraged me. And so I thought, that's what I want to do for others. And so I went to Bemidji State University. I was walking down the hallway of the art department. I remember looking into one of the classrooms and I walked in and I remember looking around and I had this cold chill. Just this doesn't feel right for some reason. And I kept walking. And now I know that was fear. But also the more I think about, and by the way, I never took one art class when I was in college. I kept walking. And I ended up in the radio and television department and mass media and public relations, and that's where I stayed. And I never even took one class, and I regret that now. But Joe, I think some of that, I don't want to get too serious here, but some of that we carry as Native people, that feeling of, I probably am not going to be good enough. My skills are not where others are. And now I know that feeling today is part of and comes from that heaviness that I felt, I know comes from historical trauma. And that burden, that heaviness comes from grandparents and parents that that survived the boarding schools. And, it's that heaviness that you carry that's always there and needs to be challenged. I didn't have the skills back then to challenge that. I just thought, my artwork's going to be judged. And that was really scary, a scary thought. So for 50 years, I painted secretly and, and shared as many pieces with family and friends, and didn't put my work out there until I got a call from one of the local galleries in Bemidji, Minnesota, and Karen Goulet contacted
Karen.
me. Yeah, she's great.
She is.
And she said, Kent, I saw your work online. And I was a technology teacher. So I built a website, and I was putting my work on the website simply just to chronicle it. Say, I painted this in 2014, and I didn't think, I don't know why, but I didn't think that anyone would find my painting, my website, because why would they? I didn't give anyone a reason. And Karen found my website. And she was talking with my niece, and she said, we're opening up a new gallery at the Watermark Art Center. It's called the Mikanon Gallery, designed just for Native artists of the region. And we're going to open up 6 months from now, and I would like you to consider submitting one of your pieces. And at first, when I called Karen back, I said, you got the wrong person here, Karen. You must be looking for my brother. I come from a family of black ash basket makers, and they're the artists in the family. I'm just fooling around with this paint stuff. And so I said, you're probably looking for my brother. And she goes, no, Kent. She said, I know who I'm talking to. I said, okay. I said, are you sure you really want me to submit my paintings? And she said, we absolutely do. She said, I can't guarantee you that the committee's going to select what you submit, but we'd like you to go ahead and do that. So I thought, okay, I'm probably not going to get selected. So I'm just going to submit whatever I think would be kind of fun and different, and maybe break free from what I had been doing. And I'm going to do some three-dimensional pieces and more multimedia pieces instead of just paint. I'm going to incorporate copper and copper wire and rock and washers and jingles and, all these things. And so I said, what the heck? It's not gonna happen. And they called and said, absolutely, yeah, we like what we're seeing, we love what we're seeing. And I walked into the Mikanon Gallery at the Watermark Art Center on reception night, and I looked at the wall, and next to the name of my piece was artist Kent Estey. And that was the first time, being 58 years old, seeing the word artist and my name next to each other. And I thought, wow. And then I saw this little red dot on my card, and I thought, what is that? Red isn't good. and so I asked one of the gallery representatives. I said, what does that mean? And she said, it means your work is already sold. I said, what? And she said, yeah, your work is already sold. And I said, this is the first night of the reception. She goes, yeah, it's gone. And I was like, I didn't even think about that. I thought about just the process of getting my work and having it hang in a gallery on their walls. Wow. This guy from Nadawash who never expected any of this to happen. Now your work is in this show and it's sold. And I thought, wow, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do more of this. And it did. and it happened. It happened, I think, relatively fast. But like I said, it takes a lot of people talking about me and my work to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to something you had mentioned, because you do come from a rich heritage of self-taught artists in your family, like the black ash basketry, the beading, the birch bark artistry. How did that environment shape your creative expression growing up?
Well, I've tried it all. I grew up in a family of artists. They would have never called themselves artists, though. We just made things all the time. And looking back now, Joe, I grew up probably in the best time, and during the best times, because we didn't have any money. I grew up in a big family. I had 7 brothers and sisters, and we're living here in the middle of the White Earth Reservation, but my father was an inventor. And so he loved to create things with his hands, whether mechanical or with wood. And so we had about every type of woodworking product, machinery that you could imagine. And so we were constantly working with wood. And then he worked in the woods for many years as a logger. And, those were the days where you actually had a chainsaw and cut down each piece, by hand. And he was always in the woods. And so during the spring and summer, we would do things like make birch bark baskets, of course. We'd make lots of birch bark baskets. And we would sell them to Itasca State Park. And so we kind of had a family assembly line where we would create these and sell them to the park. And I don't think we made any money, but that was, what we did. And we made little hatchets, we'd, cut a little hatchet out of wood and put a willow in it for the handle and put some feathers in it and put the Itasca State Park logo on there. And I'm sure they sold it as authentic Indian made pieces. I don't think they sold it as art, but we made those by the hundreds. And my father was always looking for ways to supplement the family income. And so it's just what we did. Also, my parents were professional sewers. I guess you would call them a textile artist. That's what they did. My mother was always at the sewing machine. And then in our spare time, we had lots of music. Everyone in our family played some type of instrument. So I grew up playing guitar, piano, mandolin. We had a accordion for a while. Everyone learned how to play some type of music. And then, of course, there was black ash basketry. My grandmother, she had been making baskets ever since she came back from the boarding school when she was in her middle to late teens. And she learned how to make black ash baskets from a woman from Canada. And this woman was at the local Episcopal church. My grandmother was a member of the church. And she was intrigued by this woman because she would leave and come back with logs from the woods. And so my grandmother followed her one day and followed her in the woods. And I asked my grandmother once, I said, we called her Ma. I said, Ma, I said, you really followed this woman in the woods that you really didn't know, and she had an axe? And she said, well, I wanted to see what she was doing. And so she was taught by this woman from Canada the process of making black ash baskets, removing the bark and soaking the log, and then the process of pounding the log for hours to get the growth rings to split, and then splitting pounding and splitting and making her splint, getting her splint ready. And at that time, my grandmother would use berries to dye her splint. They didn't have the RIT dye that would probably be used today. She would actually have to go out and forage, for her colors, and that was just an excuse for her to pick berries. I mean, it's what she did anyway.
Yeah.
It's what the family did anyway. So this wasn't an arduous task. It's just they did seasonal picking, and she used those colors in her baskets. So my grandmother made baskets her entire life, and she taught my father how to make baskets. And he knew that this was, at that time, I'm talking about the 70s, he knew that was a dying art, at least in this region. And so he wanted to make sure that he knew that someone in the family was carrying on that artistry. And so he learned from her. And then my father in turn taught us how to make baskets. My grandmother's baskets, by the time she was in her mid to late 70s and 80s, would end up in the Smithsonian. Senators and president got her basket. And she became known as one of the last of the black ash basket makers. And she would be interviewed countless times. And along with that would come the story. Her artistry really was her vehicle to tell her personal story of growing up on the White Earth Reservation when it was so new. Her family was one of the first families on the White Earth Reservation that settled. And she talked about, she would tell her story of what life was like before she went to boarding school and living on the lake and only speaking Ojibwe and living in the woods, and that beautiful life that the family had. And then she would contrast that with telling her story of attending 3 boarding schools. She started in White Earth. That was her first boarding school that she went to. And then she would end up in Pipestone Indian School. And then she would end up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, the big school there. And she was a student, looking up her records now, she was student 3,981. And that's where she concluded her education. She didn't graduate. Of course, they tell us now that there were 10,000 Native students that went through Carlisle, and only about 150 actually graduated. She left, and she returned to Natawash, and by that time, her land was gone. It was sold underneath her. No one was speaking Ojibwe. When she left, that's all she spoke. That's all she spoke when she attended boarding school in White Earth. Was at I think she was 9 years old when she started there. All she spoke was Ojibwe, and she says, when I came back, all I spoke was English. And of course, the culture was now against the law. There were Indian agents everywhere. monitoring people. And she came back to a reservation that was totally different and a life that was totally different. And I think about that today. And I think, they took everything. Seemingly, they took everything. But what they couldn't take from her was the artistry, the beautiful baskets that she would make and that she would share all across, United States and the world, really. Her basketry, they couldn't take that away. And she used her artistry to tell people her story about what life was like, as she was growing up on the White Earth Reservation, and what life was like in boarding schools. And she got to tell that story numerous times. And so she wasn't, I never sensed resentment in her. She obviously didn't like what she had experienced, but also, Joe, she didn't have anything to compare it to. She couldn't have said, well, I went to the local school, and that was so much better than going to the boarding school. She had nothing to compare it to. She didn't know there was anything different.
Yeah.
And so when she was beat and slapped and put in the corner because she couldn't speak English, which she didn't know any English, she didn't have anything to compare that to, and but she wasn't judgmental either. She just made her baskets, her beautiful baskets, and shared that with her family. That artistry with her family, and she was the first artist that I knew, that I recognized as an artist, that I thought, wow, this is somebody that really has mastered their skill, and because she practiced it every day. I would walk into her home, and she lived by the lake in our little town of Natawash here on the banks of North Twin Lake. And I'd walk into her house, and it was the same all the time. Her wood stove she still cooked with a wood stove in her kitchen, great big wood stove. Heated her house. There'd always be some type of soup going all the time, and would walk in, and she'd be sitting at the table with this I call it the old lady smock, this old print, and she would be working, weaving her baskets, and she would cut each splint. She would hand cut each splint with scissors. Because she was a perfectionist when it came to her artistry, and her house always smelled like sweetgrass, because she would braid her sweetgrass and then weave it into her baskets. And so there was always these wonderful smells of wood smoke and chicken soup and black ash and sweetgrass. And I'll never forget those. Never forget that. It would activate all your senses. But I knew she was different. And the first real artist that I knew, and I thought, that's a beautiful heritage,
Yeah, I imagine growing up, you're surrounded by all of this, and it's all tied into nature and community, and it's had a big impact on your work. How do the landscapes and the natural elements, how is that inspired in your paintings?
Well, I've lived on the same piece of property for 64 years. My family owns 280 acres. And we all live on this property. It's the same property I grew up on. I can still see remnants of this old barn that we had growing up, and an old chicken coop, and these logging trails, and these trails. These are the trails that I've walked for 60 years, and I'm on the same piece of property. And so all I know, Joe, is this. And it's a never ending, this land and this piece of property, these lakes, the woods, it's so much a part of who I am as an artist. There's a never ending supply of inspiration here for me. If I'm feeling like, what am I going to paint next? All I got to do is walk out my front door. My wife and I will walk in the evening, and we have these beautiful skies, and we have a clear view to the west, and I see these skies here of, this part of Minnesota, and they're so vibrant and so beautiful, and there's these pinks and oranges and it's just reds, and it just glows, and I'll hear this in my head as I'm walking. I'll hear, paint this, and I know that's my creator saying, it feels like it may seem a little corny, but it feels like this moment is just for me. And although I don't paint from photographs anymore, sometimes I'll take a snapshot. I'll take if I have my cell phone, I'll take a picture of the sky. But most of the time that's an internal memory, and I'm able to capture the sky in my brain, and then always paint my interpretation of that. Many years I used to paint very photorealistic work, and I would spend hours on a sunset and the horizon and the trees, and very fine detailed brushwork. And I got tired of that. It was after a while it became, if it wasn't perfect, if it wasn't exact of what the photograph looked like, then it wasn't good enough, I think. And my expectations were maybe too high, probably too high. But, I got tired of that. And I thought, I need to go in a different direction. I always have painted landscapes. My subject matter has always been, land, sky, and water. My hands just automatically go there. And I painted with oils primarily for most of my life. And then I, as my work started to get noticed, people started making requests and wanted to commission my work. And I heard a few times, they said, you're Indian, you're native. So could you put paint something native in that piece, in that painting? Can you put a teepee in there? Say, well, no, maybe I'll put a wigwam, but not a Ojibwe. Didn't do too much with teepee, but I could paint maybe a wigwam. Well, could you put a wolf in there, or put mukwa in there, or an eagle, something Indian, and I thought about that, and I did that. I tried to do that because I thought that's what Native artists do, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know anything different.
Yeah.
And so I tried to, of course, you try to make everybody else happy. Doesn't matter if you're not enjoying the process, or it didn't for me anyway at the time. And so I did that for a few years, and then I got really tired of painting. I got to the point of, well, how is this going to look native? My next painting.
Yeah.
And so I quit painting. I said, I'm done. This is not enjoyable anymore. And at this time, Joe, I was, the work I was doing was for fun. It was a hobby and just sharing these pieces with people. I wasn't in galleries yet or anything like that. And I talked to my wife. Well, I think, you being an artist, you would, I'm sure, understand this, that if you have an artist and they're not creating,
Mm-hmm.
they're not happy people. They just don't do very well. And I wasn't doing very well. And, I was thinking again that historical trauma comes up and how it affects you. And feeling like, well, people are liking my work. And I'm okay with the paintings that I do, but now they want me to paint something Indian in it, and because that's what I'm using that term because that's what they would say to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I quit painting and I put away my oils, and I talked to my wife after a year or so, and I hadn't painted anything, and I said, let's travel. Let's see what other native artists are creating. And so we did. And I found the work of George Morrison. And I think we were at the Whitney in New York. And of course, his work is all over. But I think we were there, and I remember seeing his piece, and I can tell you that my heart just jumped because it was so different. It was so modernist and contemporary, and the colors he uses and the application. And I thought, and I saw George Morrison, Grand Portage, Ojibwe. And I thought, and he doesn't have something Indian in it. That was the first thing. But what got me was the colors that he used. And, he had this wonderful, you could see the horizon lines in his work and these contemporary landscapes. And I thought that if I had the freedom to paint what I wanted to paint, that's what I would do. This makes sense to me. And in my head, I'm just like, yes, this is what I would do. I understand what he's doing. I can't, there's no way I can, do what he does, but this makes sense to me and the beauty that I see. Mm-hmm. And so I came back and I started researching his life, and I found a couple of things that he said that totally changed me. He said, I'm not a Native American artist. I'm an artist who just happens to be Native American. First, ding. Yep. Second was a way to express your heritage is by painting how you feel and expressing how you feel. And I thought, that's it. And I put away prior to this, I'd just been painting with oils. And I said, if I'm going to do something, if I'm going to change my style or how I feel about painting, I'm going to try a brand new medium. I'm going to challenge myself. And so what I did is I put all my oils in my small brushes in a box. And I said, I'm going to paint with acrylic. It's like, and that scared me because I understood how oil paint moved and flowed on the canvas and how I could move it.
Mm-hmm.
And so going to acrylics is like, wow, I don't think I'm going to be able to move the paint and blend the paint. And, because I didn't know anything about acrylic. And to be honest, I thought that acrylics were an inferior medium to oils, because after all the masters were painting with, so I thought, we're painting with oils. And so I moved to acrylics, and I put away my little brushes. And for the first 6 months, I challenged myself. I went to big canvas. I said, okay, let's start with the 36 by 48 canvas. And so it was a large piece. And I said, no brushes for 6 months. And so I learned how to move the paint with my fingers on the canvas. I didn't want to see brush strokes. I just wanted to be able to feel that paint slide across the canvas and how it was able to blend with other colors. And I had to, for some reason, I had to touch that, so that I could really feel the texture of the paint and how it moves. And I did that for 6 months. I painted without a brush and created what I could create. And then I allowed myself some other tools. I said, well, you're going to need to push paint and scrape paint. And so out came, old credit cards, sticks, rollers, anything but a brush. And I learned to use those tools on my to apply paint that way. And then after that came, I said, okay, it's time to go back to brushwork. But this time you're going to start with a 6-inch brush and a 4-inch brush. So I went to huge brushes and I learned how to use large brushes, and because I wanted movement on my canvas. How am I going to do that? How am I going to show this movement with just using a large field of color? And so I bought 6-inch brushes and 4-inch brushes, and I played with those for many months. Mm-hmm. And then I allowed myself to go back to normal size brushes. Nothing very detailed. But by that time, a good year or more, excuse me, a year or more of using different tools in a different medium. My work was looking different, and my landscapes were looking different. And that's when, and I started posting them, and that's when I started to get recognized. That's when the Karen Goulets were calling, and Joe Allens, and the Joe Williams, and these people were calling, because my work was getting noticed, because it was something different. Mm-hmm. And then the colors came, and the brighter the better, the bolder the better, as far as I'm concerned, because I talk about, too many years, like I said, of not creating. Artists can go to real dark places. You're not happy people if you really are a creator, mm-hmm. and you're not creating. Mm-hmm. That's a dangerous place to be. Mm-hmm. And then all that historical trauma stuff surfaces, mm-hmm. and it manifests itself as alcoholism and depression and anxiety and all those things. And so when I broke free with my painting and returned to painting, thanks to George Morrison, that lifted and my way of getting out of that darkness was to use the boldest, brightest colors that I could find. So that's why you see a lot of fluorescent paint in my work. It's not because I want them to glow in the dark, but it's the brightest paint that I can find. And you'll see a lot of that in my work. I think there's a couple of things why I use those colors. First of all, those are the colors that I see. That's the sky that I see here in this little community of Netawash. And it's not only what I see, but what I want you to see. Mm-hmm. That's what I paint, is what I want you to be able to see. It's not an exact replicant. I don't do that anymore, but it's what I want you to see. But these colors are also my way, I guess, out of some dark times in my life, and so I celebrate that. And people say, when we're out and about and we're showing my work at art fairs and street events, people say, your paintings make me feel happy and brings joy. And I thought, wow, yeah, that's exactly what I want to leave you with. And so long story short, I guess, I don't know. George Morrison was Joe, I don't know if I would be painting today had I not found George Morrison. I really don't know if any of this would have happened. Because of his, so the right person comes along at the right time and says a couple of statements, totally changed my life. And so now, 8 years later, I'm going to galleries to see my work. And one of the greatest joys so far, and I've had many, but one of the ultimate joys was I submitted a piece to All My Relations Gallery in Minneapolis, and they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of George Morrison. And I submitted something. I thought, it's not going to get, of course, it's not going to get, but I'll try anyway.
Yeah.
And it was selected. And so we went to the reception, and I walked in, and there was my piece. And then on either side of my piece were 2 George Morrison originals hanging. And I thought,
that's fantastic.
Okay, that's enough now. That's it. That I've reached. It was such a moment for me. It was overwhelming, and I had to leave because my wife could tell I was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I said, Becky, that's the greatest honor I could ever get. Is my work hanging on the same wall as George Morrison? And then a couple of years, if you jump ahead, I had a exhibition, a group exhibition in Duluth at the ACO Galleries, and his son, on reception night, came and played, guitar at my reception, and I was able to talk with him and tell him about, his father's influence on my work, and now his son is playing at my reception, and it's like, wow, this just keeps getting better and better and better, and so all of that, Joe. All of those things, and the longer I do this, I've been painting a long time, but not showing my work. what's happened because of those things along the way is that I trust myself now. I trust what I paint is the right thing. I don't question anymore. What should I paint? Should I paint something Indian? Should I put something Indian in that work? What I've done is say, you know what? I'm never painting for anybody else again. I'm just painting for me. And if it's who I am, I trust myself to do what I'm doing today. And it's not my job to determine if you like my work or not. That's your job. Is it good or not? Is my work good or not? I don't question that anymore, because it is just what it is. It's just my creation. It's your job to like it. You know, I don't create things for people to like. That's nice that happens. I don't know if this is making sense, but it's more about, you know what, this is how I feel, and this is how I'm going to express that, and these are the colors that I'm going to use, and this is the medium I'm selecting, and I hope you like it. But if not, you know what, this is the best I could do for me today. And that's kind of my feeling now is, you know what, Kent, trust yourself. Just trust yourself. You've been painting a long time. Just trust yourself and do what you do. And for me today, that's good enough.
Yeah.
It's good enough.
So what's next for you? What's on the horizon? Are there upcoming exhibitions or new projects that you're working on? I wanted to touch on the Region 2 Arts Council on your fellowship, because, well, first off, congratulations. It's fantastic that you're a fellow for 2023, 2024. But yeah, what's on the horizon for you?
It just keeps getting better. So along the way, I've had this education of learning about Native artists and northern half of the United States Native artists and maybe woodland artists. And I've been able to meet some of, I wish I would have been able to meet in person George Morrison. You know, we follow his work, and wherever we go, we're looking for Morrison's pieces. But there's so many artists like Sam Zimmerman and Gordon Koons and, you know, and the Desjardins and these names, you know, and I admire their work so much. And now this next year, I'm going to be with some of those artists.
Oh, that's exciting.
You know, and we've got an exhibition coming up next fall at a Unitarian church in Minneapolis that I'm going to share the walls with some of these people that I've admired for such a long time. And that's the greatest. That just feels so good. And it's almost a pinch me moment that, you know, my work's going to be hanging next to Gordon Koon's work or sharing space with him.
It's fantastic.
And many others. And so, you know, there's exhibition opportunities coming up this next year. And I'm excited about those. We do a lot of art in the parks and things like that. Last summer, we did 14 weekends in a row, traveling across Minnesota and North Dakota. And that was a little crazy, but I said, you know what? Let's see how people are responding to my work. You know, we've got to get out there. We got to get off the reservation too. And so we created a business that will allow for that, and it was fun. It was hard work but fun, and the response was the response was great. I left education early. I wasn't going to retire till I was 65. I left when I was 61 because I had just reached during COVID, I had just reached my limit of technology. I was technology coordinating and networking and doing all that stuff. And I just worked myself sick, literally sick. And I said, okay, I'm done. So my wife said, well, what are you going to do? I said, you know what? I'm going to paint. I'm going to create an art business. And she said, by all means. And within a year, I had replaced my teaching income the very first year out. Wow. And I thought, this can happen. And one of my art friends, she told me, she said, Kent, she said, don't let anyone ever tell you that you have to be a starving artist. You do not have to be there. If you are starving, you probably aren't doing the right things. So maybe you better get some advice and ask for help. And so I listened to that. And I, talked to a lot of people and said, how do you do this? How do you create an art business? How do you manage the galleries and the art fairs and the home studio and the online and the social media and the business end and all of that? And so we put that into place, and now I wish I would have left education 10 years ago. So, but also, Joe, the important message, I think, is you can be and live in a little town, a little reservation town of Natawash, smack dab in the middle of the White Earth Reservation. And the closest, Walmart is 50 miles away. And you can create an art business and do what you love to do. And be successful at it. In my mind, in my eyes, I guess I'm successful because it's paying our bills and people are coming, and I think people like my work, and we've been able to build a studio, and it's really, and this is, I get emotional at times thinking about it because this wasn't the plan. This wasn't, growing up poor here and very limited. I remember as a little boy, 6 years old, and just thinking, I want to paint, but I don't have paint here. I don't have brushes at home. So let's mix mud and sand and gravel and water and let's go find an old house brush and let's use that and paint on the side of your barn. And imagine the colors. Imagine blue and green and orange. And I remember spending hours doing that and just using my imagination to fill in those colors and thinking, oh, man, am I ever going to see anything beyond this little reservation town? Am I ever going to be able to go to a gallery or a museum where there's real paintings, there's real art? I remember thinking that as a little kid and thinking, there's got to be more than this, what I'm seeing in my house, Yeah. The dogs playing cards, velvet thing wasn't enough. I needed to see more than that. And I knew that back then that I wanted to be an artist, but I also knew, but This is where I live, and this is where I am. And now, jump ahead 50 some years, I'm going to galleries to see my work hanging on the wall. And so I feel blessed, and I feel it's an honor for people to have my work in their homes. And because I didn't expect this, and it just keeps getting better and better, and more opportunities are coming along the way. But also I want to make sure you hear this, is that there's a reason why people paint and do and create. I believe there's a bigger picture, I think. And today I know, probably just like my grandmother, that the reason why I paint is to be able to have conversations like we're having, whether it be one-on-one or large groups, or my artist talks, and talk about, be able to tell my grandmother's story about growing up on the White Earth Reservation and what life was like for her, and then going to boarding schools, and then coming back to a reservation where everything was gone. Telling that story, and now telling my story of how and why I quit painting, and coming out of that depression and anxiety and all of that. And my art becomes that vehicle to tell that story that others want to hear or need to hear. So just like my grandmother, I get to tell my story, and I get to tell her story too. So I think that's why ultimately, that's the best part of it. Yeah, I love to have my work shown in places and in people's homes, and that's really, really important. But also, maybe it's the educator in me, I don't know. But I need to tell my grandmother's story and my parents' story. My parents were also boarding school survivors. And so, that's not 1,000 years ago we're talking about, Joe.
Yeah.
That's just my parents and my grandparents, and some people like to put that story, put it away. They like to put that a long ways away. And I tell people today, there is a reason who I am and why I do what I do. And a part of that comes from that story of my grandmother and my parents. And so I get to share that story today, and it's hard sometimes because you have to revisit the trauma a bit. And this last month I've told that story 4 times. A part of my artist talk, and to big groups, and there are some people. So I've heard, it's not always positive, it's hard. And I've had some people say, in their comments, they say, oh, this could have never happened. The government and the church would never do this to people. And I'm going, yep, they did. And this is my grandmother and my father, but it's hard for people to hear that too. You don't like to hear some of the trauma and all of that. So I understand some of that. And so I just encourage people, well, do some research, do your own research,
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
Well, Kent, this brings us to the end of this episode and our time together on Beyond the Art. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. It's nice to see you, and it's always fun to talk about art and what's happening in the big metropolis of Natawash, Minnesota, out here in the woods, and I'm just enjoying this experience and getting to share what I can share.
It's great reconnecting with you, and I so enjoy your feed on social media. Watching your studio come together, and all the events that you're at. It's always such a joy to see you pop up like that.
Thank you.
So Kent's work really reminds us of a deep connection between emotion, culture, and art that brings those elements to life. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast to bring us more stories like Kent to the forefront. I'm Joe Williams, alongside with Craig Beaumont Flynn. We'll see you next time as we continue to explore these stories of Beyond the Art.
Kent Estey reminds us that color can be a prayer, that movement can be a memory, and that even silence on a canvas or in a moment can speak. Through his work, he captures what so many of us overlook, the quiet beauty of the everyday and the stories whispered through generations. We thank Kent for sharing his heart, his practice, and his perspective. This has been Beyond the Art, where every brushstroke tells a story.